Hello and welcome to the Nick Lugo show. Today I had on Doug Noll and he is, well, incredible. He's absolutely incredible. I just finished my podcast with him and he dug deep into me. He blew my mind. And what he's going to be talking about is his book, De-Escalate, How to Calm Somebody Down in 90 Seconds, and pretty much how everything that we've learned about emotional intelligence, socialization, and, well, dealing with conflict and confrontation is pretty much wrong. And well, his is based off neuroscience, his is based off theory, and he's going to be explaining to you why, well, you could change your life. I seriously think that my life is going to be changed after this. So without further ado, let's get started. Emotional vulnerabilities, yes. Prison, yep. Like, and I'm just like, man, like
Hitting all
you
your
had
buttons.
me.
Well, that's cool because that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get people like you. What are you, 21, 22,
20.
20? If I can teach young people like you what I've learned, I will save you so much grief and your life will be amazing if you learn once you start learning and mastering these skills. So,
well, trust me.
that's what I'm all about.
So I was spent a lot of time trying to think of the questions for this podcast and the questions to ask you, you know. And what I eventually came up with was it would make no sense for me to ask these general, like, what if type questions, right? What I came up with was it would be better if I asked questions that were pertinent to me, right? The problems that I
There you go.
experience in my
Yeah,
life.
let's talk about your problems. That you
Yeah.
Perfect. I love that. And I can actually use all the different skills on you, and your audience can listen and learn exactly how I do it. Although there's a little bit more to it than that, but people can get the idea of what this is all about because it's very counterintuitive.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
different than what anybody's ever thought about or experienced before, but it's very effective.
That's the thing. Like a lot of the stuff that I was thinking about, asking and all of these things, I was like, and all the stuff I was learning from you is like, it doesn't really make sense in terms of the things that I've learned before.
Correct.
So,
that's because you've been lied to for 20 years.
well, I guess
we've all been lied to, not just you, but all of us. For 3,000 years, we've been lied to. Complete lie. That, for example, that we're rational beings. We are not rational beings. No, we're not rational beings. Socrates was wrong. Plato was wrong. Aristotle was wrong. Bishop Augustine, Bishop of Hippo was wrong. Immanuel Kant was wrong. Descartes was wrong. They're all wrong.
So tell me,
because and the reason they're wrong is because they didn't have the benefit of neuroscience. And now we know.
Interesting.
We are emotional beings, not rational beings. And once you get that insight, everything changes.
So you worked in law for 22 years, right?
I was the supreme rationalist.
How would you make such a realization that we are not rational beings?
Well, the transformation took quite a while. It didn't happen overnight. But where I started the transformation in the 80s. And then I ended up going back to school and getting my master's degree in the mid 90s in peacemaking and conflict studies. And that completely opened my eyes to human conflict in a way that the law completely misses. And I just made the decision to quit. And I literally gave 1 week's notice to my partners with a 22-year law practice and walked away, left $10 million on the table and just walked away from it.
Wow.
And from there on out, I was being engaged to come into these high-end, intense conflicts and help people work through a process so they could solve their conflicts. Sometimes they were litigated disputes. Sometimes they were not litigated, like family business conflicts or congregational disputes. And I was studying neuroscience at the time, and suddenly it dawned on me that as I was reading and studying that what people like Antonio Damasio were saying was what I was seeing right in front of me every day. That people are emotional. They're not rational. They're never rational. And they're especially not rational when they're in conflict. Totally emotionally driven. And so I began to, as I was reading the science and started learning the science and then watching behaviors, I saw how the behaviors were tracking exactly what the neuroscientists were saying. And this is something else to know, exactly the opposite of what the psychologists were saying. The psychologists had no clue. They were all back on Freud and Jung and all those guys who were all wrong. They're all wrong. Freud, completely wrong. There's nothing about Freud that's truthful. No, there's not one scientific empirical study that establishes that Freud had any empirical validity in his thinking at all. Now, the guy was a genius. No question about that. But he was wrong. Every single one of his theories was wrong.
So what was wrong about them, right? What was wrong
Okay,
about
so
the
let's start off.
traditional philosophy?
Let's start off with his data set. His data set was 15 upper middle class Viennese women in their 40s. That was his data set. Every single theory that he developed was based on those 15 women. He was a sexist beyond belief. Of course, all the men back then were, and he was Jewish too. So he had his own guilt burden and his own shame burden. Plus, he's trying to become a professor at the University of Vienna, and he is building up all these theories of mind, which is where he's a genius. He was the first one to start trying to formulate what's going on. And he was using his metaphor, for example, neuroses and psychoses, and how emotions build up, and then if you don't release them and have catharsis, then it blows up in you. Well, he was using metaphor from the 19th century Industrial Revolution with the 3 laws of thermodynamics. And in those days, boilers were blowing up because they had lousy metallurgy and poor controls. And so the steam boiler would build pressure, and boom, and a whole bunch of people would die. And so he started using the idea of steam as a metaphor for emotions, because that's what he thought he was seeing. But that's not what happens at all. Not even close. And so then he built up this whole edifice, theoretical edifice around the ego, the id, the superego. No, there's no such thing as that. None of that's true. And there's absolutely no neuroscience to support anything that he taught. And then other people came off of him, like Jung and other people came off of him, because he was the one that broke the waters and said, hey, let's start thinking about mind. And they all started coming up with these theories that they were just theories based on very superficial observation of human behavior. And the whole edifice of psychology was built on that. And then, of course, there was a reaction to that in the 1940s. The behaviorists came in with Skinner and Watson. So they drove everybody only to behaviorism. And that lasted until basically the mid 70s, when cognitive psychology came into play and people started looking at cognition. They started doing different kinds of experiments, but the psychologists were still way off, because nobody could really look at the brain until 1993, when functional magnetic resonance imaging came into play. And now we can actually watch the brain operate. Now, granted, there are limitations to fMRI, but there are a whole bunch of other technologies that have been developed that allow scientists to see what is actually going on. And what they see is not what Freud or Jung or any of these other guys, Adler or any of these guys talked about. It's totally different, totally different.
So you make this claim, and I've understood, right? And I believe it, like I've seen it, and this is based off the neuroscientific evidence. How exactly can I calm someone down in 90 seconds?
3 steps. Step number 1. Ignore the words. You've got somebody you can have two situations. You got somebody who's really angry, but not at you, or you can have somebody who's really angry at you. Doesn't matter. Ignore the words. Make it white noise for 2 reasons. Number 1, if you listen to the words, you're going to get triggered, and then you're going to go back into childhood programming, and the conflict's going to escalate, and it's going to get worse. That's especially if somebody's angry at you. If you're watching somebody be angry, but they're not angry at you, then the next thing that's going to happen, if you don't ignore the words, is your anxiety is going to come up, and you're going to try to unconsciously self-soothe yourself. And you're going to make all kinds of stupid stuff that everybody does all the time. You're going to go into problem solving. You're going to get defensive. You're going to try to appease. You're going to try to use rational explanation. You're going to emotionally invalidate. All you're going to do is make it worse.
Yeah,
that's what everybody does, because nobody knows any better. Yeah. Ignore the words. The second reason you ignore the words is because you have to open up bandwidth in your brain to do the next 2 steps. So ignore the words. It's just noise. Don't even pay attention to it. There's nothing there that you're going to miss. You've heard those angry words many times before.
Yeah.
Second step, read the emotions. Now, it's very obvious with an angry person that they've got anger, but underneath that are almost always 6 or 7 other emotions. And so what you learn to do is to read all of those underlying emotions. And here's the thing that's really cool. Our brains are hardwired for this. The reason that we don't use this skill is because we have such a bias against emotions and such a bias towards, quote, rationality, that we never learn to utilize this innate skill. But it's so simple to use. All you have to do is sit there, say somebody just screaming at you, you're ignoring the words, you're just breathing, you're just sort of being present, and you wait, let your brain preconsciously process what's going on, and all of a sudden these emotions will start to flow into your brain. And so So all of a sudden now you know exactly what to say. And then the third step, which is the key, is to reflect back the emotions with a you statement. Not an I statement, a you statement. So it would go like this. Nick, man, you are really pissed off. You're really angry. You're really frustrated. You don't feel supported. You feel completely betrayed. You're unappreciated. And you're feeling a little bit of anxiety around this. It's a little scary for you because you don't know what's going to happen next. And you're a little sad because nobody's around you supporting you, and you feel like you've been completely abandoned. And the whole thing is just really pissing you off, and you're really frustrated.
You want to know something? So
you had a reaction to that, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it actually like had an effect on me, like what you just said there. Like I was sitting there and like I felt, I'm watching your YouTube videos and trying to understand like, okay, what is this method that's supported by neuroscience and all this stuff? It felt a little patronizing, right? It felt like not now, but just like when I'm thinking
watching
about
me do it, and that's what everybody says.
Yeah, like it feels like you're pulling some psychological technique, and like it's more of like a stop messing with me. But I wasn't even mad, and I just felt some sort of like
relief. You felt like you felt validated and listened to.
And I felt calm.
That's right. And that's it. And it happens unconsciously, and you're not even aware of it. From the outsider, it looks rude, it looks patronizing, it looks manipulative.
Yeah.
It looks like you're violating all kinds of social norms about interruptions. I mean, it looks awful.
Yeah.
but when I do it to this is what's so fun. When I do workshops, I'll do just what I did with you. I say, well, Nick, come on up and tell me a story. So you tell me a story about something that went on. And so I affect label you. And this is called affect labeling. And you relax and say, wow, yeah, exactly. And then I turn to everybody in the workshop. So what did you see? And invariably, people are going to say, that was the rudest, I could never do that. And I'll turn to Nick and say, Nick, what was the experience like for you? And you'll say, I've never been so deeply listened to before in my life. And everybody in the workshop, their jaws drop. They say, what? No way. And they'll start cross-examining Nick, right? Say, Nick, come on. Didn't you feel like he was really interrupting? No, he wasn't interrupting me at all. He was really listening to me. I really felt like he was working with me. And I really felt validated. And they're all just shaking their heads. They can't believe it.
It felt like...
And then I get them into doing it, and all of a sudden they get the experience. And they say, oh, we're not in conversation, we're in listening. And that's what I tell people. You're applying the rules of conversation that you learned at 2 years old to what we're doing here. No, we're not in conversation. Listening is not conversation. Listening is a completely different skill with a completely different set of rules.
Well, so now I understand what you sort of meant when you said like Freud and Jung and all those people were wrong, right? What they want to do is they want to go into a deep conversation and get really into it. And what are your problems?
Right.
It's like one of the big problems, and I think this is something that is built into your philosophy of don't listen to their words, is that sometimes people don't even know why they're angry.
That's right. Well, not only do they not know, they don't even know that they're angry. So for example, I could say, Nick, you're really angry. And you'll say, no, I'm not angry. Hell no, I'm not angry. So then while what's going, they are so angry, their brain can't process it. So what you do is you say, oh, okay, you're not angry, you're really frustrated. Yeah, I'm really frustrated. And you feel like unappreciated and disrespected. And you've been treated really unfairly. Yeah. And it's really frustrating you and making you a little bit anxious. Yeah. And it's really pissing you off and you're really angry. Yeah. It happens every single time.
And it seems like in part of
people are so emotionally incompetent because they've never been trained how to be emotionally competent that they will have these deep emotional experiences and not even recognize what's going on. And there's a huge amount of science behind why this happens.
And it seems like a lot of your philosophy goes into not only like understanding the primary, like, okay, emotional feeling, but you also dig a lot deeper. Like you go into these layers of, you don't feel emotionally validated. You feel
right. Well, right. Exactly. You observe that there are 6 layers and there's 6 layers of emotions. I've broken it down into 6 layers of emotions. You could break it down any way you want. But for what I've seen and what I experienced over 20 years of doing is that you've got anger at the top, the anger emotions, of which it goes in anger, frustration, annoyance, irritation, being enraged, hatred. Next one is what I call dignitary emotions, being treated unfairly, disrespected, unappreciated, unsupported, betrayed, and words like that. Then below that are the fear emotions, which is feared, scared, anxious. Below that are shame, humiliation, guilt, and embarrassment. Below that, sadness and grief. And then at the bottom, being abandoned and being unloved and being unlovable. And it's the bottom emotion that triggers the top one.
Interesting. So when you actually do your you statements, right? This is all, by the way, just tell me, this is all in your book, De-escalation, how to calm
Yes,
somebody
it's
down.
in my book. And also, of course, the book came out in 2017. I've learned a lot since then. So if you go to my website and read a lot of my blogs, you'll see where I go deep into a lot of this stuff. The book covers it all, but you'll also find a lot on my website.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so to be able to de-escalate, right? What you're doing is you actually, in your you statements, you're actually like taking people downwards. You say you feel angry, then you
don't even say feel, you say you are, or you are angry. Right now you are angry, you are sad, you can say you feel, but I really prefer, I have found that the more direct you are, the more powerful you are.
Okay. And then, wow, I see what you did there. And then you go deeper. So you start at stage 1, then you go down to level 2, then level 3, and people start to kind of accept it.
Basically, but there are some caveats here. The first is you've got to think about context. Who are you de-escalating and where are you? In a business environment, for example, it would be inappropriate to go too deep because these social rules around emotions, right? So now, if you're one-on-one, that's okay. But if you're in a group setting, for example, supposing you're leading a group, and in every group there's always an asshole, and so you've got to de-escalate that asshole. Well, you wouldn't go down to abandonment and unlove. You probably wouldn't even go down to shame, humiliation. You'd probably just stay at the top 2 layers, top 2, maybe 3 layers. So they're angry, they feel unheard, and they feel anxious. And that might be as far as you go. If you were a friend or your intimate partner, then yes, you would go all the way. You go deep. And the other thing you do, the reason that I like these 6 layers, is you start where whatever presents first. For angry people, it's obvious. You start at the top and then you work your way down. But you might see somebody who's really sad. Maybe they just lost an animal or a loved one. So you say you're really sad. You feel a lot of grief right now.
That's number 5, right?
Yeah. Well, sadness is almost at the bottom. But then you work your way back up and then you go all the way down. So for sadness and grief, there's still going to be anger there, believe it or not, but you're not going to see the anger. You feel really sad, you feel a lot of grief. And then depending upon what you're feeling, you'll say you feel completely lost, you feel completely unsupported, and you're a little bit angry that you've been abandoned and you don't know what to do. You're anxious about it. And then I would say you do feel completely abandoned and unloved, like nobody loves you right now because you've lost this really important person, pet, whatever it is in your life. And that's how you deal with grief.
Got it. Well, here's one of the things, I wonder about in a group setting, right? In definitely like family setting, business environment, you talk a lot about the dinner table with family, right? Like, do you also employ this technique? Like you're employing this psychological...
Only after you've mastered it, yes. This is not something you just jump into and do. It takes practice. It takes about a month's worth of practice to really not nail it down. But yes, once you've got it and you really have the confidence that you work, if you're just at the family dinner table, you're not going to do a big whole affect label. What you're going to do is you're going to do throwaways. Oh, Uncle Joe, you're really frustrated. Or Uncle Joe, you're really pissed off. Those socialists in government right now really piss you off. Trumpian, right? And or it could be the other way. So Uncle Joe, those damn Trumpies, Republicans just drive you crazy. And you're really frustrated. It really makes you angry. And that's all you would say.
So what about if somebody just says from there, right? I can imagine there are 2 ways that someone could take it, right? So one of them is you get this calming effect. The other one is you know what? I am damn angry, and then they continue.
So then what I would do, you know what? I am damn angry, Doug. And then I said, well, tell me more about that. And then they start telling their story. And then I'll just affect label them as they tell me their story.
So they feel understood.
Validated, not understood. They feel validated.
Okay.
Once they feel validated, they calm down and the conversation changes. And they'll say, thank you for listening to me. That I really feel understood. Thank you very much.
Wow.
You just validated them, deeply validated them.
So let me tell you what's going on through my mind. So right now, right, I struggle with the problem. It's a big five personality trait. I struggle with the problem of being too agreeable. And for all my agreeable people out
Agreeableness,
there,
right? You're all the way over on the left side.
I'm all the way over on the left. And
I got it.
unfortunately, confrontation, like I had this problem with my brothers when I was younger, right? So my brothers, they love to play, they love to mess around. And of course, I love to play. But there's a point where, like, I feel like they take it too far. And when they take it too far, I have the option to escalate and be like, they punch me on the shoulder. Do I punch them in the face? Do I punch them harder on the shoulder? Or do I go with, and this is what I called it, back when I was younger, I was raised Christian, or should I go with the Jesus philosophy of, being agreeable and being like, well, not necessarily agreeable, but just not fighting back, the Gandhi, Buddha, type of idea. But then I realized, what?
Go ahead, tell the story.
But then I realized that what that makes you become is that makes you become a punching bag.
That's right.
Right.
And so your characterization of Jesus and Gandhi and Buddha is the social myth that has been created around those people, totally all false. Gandhi was anything but soft. He was a lawyer. Most people don't know that. And he was tough as nails. And all he was doing, he was not a peacemaker. Neither was Jesus a peacemaker. People and Buddha certainly was not a peacemaker. What they were different. They were different people for their times. Gandhi wanted to liberate India from the Great Britain's rule.
Yes.
What he came up with was a way of using Britain's moral standing, because the British have this moral standing, we're moral people, against them. And the way he did that was by developing civil disobedience. And so he would do these mass civil disobedience protests, nonviolent, but not peaceful.
Yeah.
That's the difference. Jesus, boy, people get Jesus so screwed up. They really never studied the history of Jesus. Jesus was a political radical. And he was a rabbi. He never intended to establish a rhythm. He's not a guy that established a religion. This is all the bullshit that came later. He was into peace, but he was also into civil disobedience and he was caught as a Jew in that period. He was caught between the Pharisees, the Zealots, and the Essenes, and for three different Jewish sects that existed in what was then Palestine. And he was doing a dance between all of them because a lot of people saw him as being the Messiah, not the Messiah as coming from God, but the Messiah who was in the Jewish tradition was going to come deliver them from the Romans. So he was seen as somebody who was going to upset the apple cart and kick the Romans out, which is why
Moses.
The Pharisees were happy with the current political situation because they were the ones making all the wealth off the Romans, and the Romans were fine as long as nobody upset the apple cart. They were fine. So the Pharisees basically set him up as being a radical, and that's why he was killed. He was crucified not because of he died for his sins and all that's just all myth. What it was he was really, really upsetting the apple cart a lot. He was teaching people how to be themselves, how to be empowered as people of peace and love and civil disobedience. And the Romans didn't want that.
But all these guys caused confrontation, right? Confrontation, conflict, all of it.
And Buddha was the same way. I mean, he wasn't about no conflict. He was about be peaceful and be peaceful in your heart. But there's conflict everywhere. Yeah. But all these myths have been created over all these years around all these so-called peacemakers. None of them were peacemakers. And so we have all this myth, and that's where we get appeasement and trying to be a pleaser and trying to avoid conflict, because to avoid conflict is not Jesus' way. Totally wrong. I mean, think about Jesus going on the temple and throwing all the money changers away. I mean, he did some pretty serious stuff. Yeah. Don't tell me he couldn't engage in conflict. He was really good at it.
Yeah. So
he got pissed off, and he showed people he was pissed off.
Well, that's the thing,
you never hear people talking about that. So all this goes back to your brother's punching you. He's trying to get a rise out of you. And so if you were to use my skills, you would want to label him. What are his emotions? What's his emotional experience? Why is he punching you? Why is he trying to get a rise out of you? What emotions are going on that would cause that?
Are you asking me?
Yeah.
Let's see. There's obviously the instinct to play, right? But there's also the instinct to, let's say,
Dominate.
Dominate. Yeah. And then I guess I'm unskilled at this because that's probably all I have.
All right. So your brother is you guys are bantering around, all of a sudden he starts to punch you and he wants to sort of get engaged. Here's what's going on with him. He is so emotionally incompetent that he doesn't even know that he's having an emotional experience. And he's in a condition known as alexithymia, where he cannot state his own emotions, but he's feeling, I'll get a little technical here, he's got an interoceptive experience where his body is telling him something that's going on. That is triggering affect in his brain. But because he can't translate the affect into emotion, because something he didn't meant, and most kids don't develop this because parents are incompetent and they can't teach any higher than their own competency. He now is being reactive to his own affective and interoceptive experience because he can't express his emotions.
Okay.
So now, in order to deal with that, have you ever had the experience that you're so mad you punch your fist through a wall?
Of course.
Of course. That is alexithymia. That's the inability to say to yourself, I am really angry, I'm really frustrated, I'm really pissed off, I'm really anxious, I feel embarrassed and shame, I don't feel supported, I don't feel appreciated. You label yourself. Then all of a sudden you calm down. When people cannot do that, then they get all this affective experience going on, and the only way they can relieve it is by taking physical action, which
You're
is
making it sound like
this is where violence comes from.
Yeah.
And at a much more minor degree, it's getting punched on the shoulder. So you turn to your brother and say, hey, bro, you're really frustrated and anxious right now. Huh? Yeah, you're really frustrated. Something's kind of pissing you off a little bit. It's not me, but I don't think, but something's really pissing you off and you're really frustrated and you're a little anxious. Oh yeah, I am frustrated and anxious. And you're feeling a little unappreciated and unsupported. Yeah, and it's making it kind of sad. Yeah. Boom, over. It's that fast. Boom, it's over with.
I'm not gonna lie. I mean, as I'm sitting here, I'm saying there's no way that's gonna work, right? Like that is first reaction.
Everybody says, of course, and it works every time. Dude, I've been training murderers to be peacemakers in maximum security prisons for 11 years. This is the first thing I teach them. Don't
give me a story.
Of course, you don't know it doesn't work because you haven't gone out and tried it yet. But let me tell you, it works, and it works first time every time because our brains are hardwired for this.
So give me a story.
That's the neuroscience.
Help me understand.
It's so counterintuitive to everything that you've ever heard or listened to before. And it seems to contradict everything that you know. And it's true. It does contradict, and it is counterintuitive. But it's based on hard science. There are over 20 studies, brain scanning studies, that show how this works and why it works and the effects of it in different situations.
So I would love to hear a story because, you can show, don't tell.
Let me tell you a prison story.
Okay.
One of my first, the one I like to tell the most because it's so salient. So my colleague Laurel Carfer and I started Prison of Peace in 2010. And it's a long story how it started, but ultimately we were training 15 women in the largest, most violent women's prison in the world. And these women were all lifers and long-termers, many of them murderers.
So this is why they sent you there. They sent you there to
send us there. We got a letter from one of the inmates asking if we could come in. And we said, yes, we'll try. And then we finally got permission to go in and teach our skills.
Got it. Okay.
And our whole program today, it's huge. I mean, global. But I mean, back then we had no idea where it was going to go. We're law professors and mediators and teachers. And all we want to do, can we teach people who are lifers and long-termers in violent prisons how to be peacemakers and mediators so that they can reduce the prison violence? That was that's our basic goal. And the basic question. So we come in after we teach them. The very first thing we teach is how to listen. 4 levels of listening. What we're talking about now is the 4th and deepest level of listening. There are 3 other levels of listening. So we teach them how to listen, and then we give them homework and go out and practice. So we come in on week number 4 or 5, can't remember which. We come into this conference room where we've been teaching, and one of our students is sitting on a chair, and she's quietly sobbing. And this is before anybody else shows up. So Laurel walks over, we walk over, and the woman's name, Sarah, tells us this story. She said, I've been in prison for 18 years because I killed a family of 4 as a drunk driver because I was an alcoholic. And I came away from that accident without a scratch. Before I came to prison, I had to give up my 3-year-old boy to my sister to raise. I've written him a letter every single week since I've been in prison. He's now 21 years old. And I have never heard a word from him. He's never come to visit. He's never called me. He's never written. The other day, I decided to write a letter using the skills that you've taught us about how to listen, especially how to listen to emotions. And I imagined all the emotions that he must have experienced over the last 18 years. And I wrote a long, long letter labeling his emotions, not anything about me, just about him. And today, for the first time in 18 years, I got a letter back from him.
Wow.
And it was really angry. But at the end, it said, I love you, Mom. I'm bringing my girlfriend and we'll come visit you in a couple of weeks. And she started weeping again.
Wow. So how long was that after the training began?
4 weeks.
4 weeks. Wow. That's crazy.
Not crazy. I have so many stories like that. Hundreds of stories like that.
So we're trying to understand, in this case, I guess the psychology of the son, right? Like, what is the son feeling? And one letter, all it took was one letter where you're saying you felt validated.
The son wanted at a gut level was to be validated by his mother. And once she validated him, the estrangement ended.
I could imagine, right? Because he's saying, I feel abandoned.
I have seen this happen so many times. I got an email in May, out of the blue. I got an email from this guy. Mm-hmm. He says, my wife is a student of your wife's, my wife's, and she bought your book and has taken your emotional competency courses. And he said, my problem is that I've got Asperger's. I'm a serial multi-hundred-millionaire entrepreneur. And I tell everybody what to do, and I have no emotional competency. And finally, my wife said, I'm done. We need to separate. I need a timeout. Mm. So we've been separated for 6 weeks. And he said, I got your book. I took your online course, and I started affect labeling her. And she said, in a text, she said, there is hope for our marriage. Didn't hear another word from him until June. And in June this year, I got an email from him, and he said, Dear Doug, my wife and I are in Maui celebrating her birthday and our 25th wedding anniversary. Thank you very much.
Wow. Wow. I mean, I think it's such a big problem, so I'm in the Kelley School of Business right now at Indiana University. And one of the biggest studies that came out, which blew my mind away, was 21% of CEOs could be registered as psychopathic.
Right. Narcissistic, or they have maladaptive narcissism.
Exactly. So, it seems as if we are taught in some degree, or at least based off that, we could just say on a first basis level that to be good is also to reject emotions, right? And to be controlling.
That is the myth.
Yeah.
That is a myth that has caused more harm and more injury and more criminal behavior and more hardship and hurt than any other myth in Western culture. Mm. Augustine wrote, the only way you can get to heaven is through reason, and only men can reason. Women can't go to heaven. Mm-hmm. And he was the guy that constructed the Catholic theology. And the Catholic theology is not based on the Bible, it's based on Neoplatonism. He was a Neoplatonist.
Interesting.
I mean, people are so caught up in these myths that are simply not true that all they do is perpetuate the harm and the hurt. 96% of all families are emotionally dysfunctional. I'll give you an example. When you were 2 years old, let me just give you an example. When you were 2 years old, running around outside, you fall down, you scrape your knee, start to cry. What are you told?
What am I told? Most likely, stop crying.
That's right. What else? Toughen up, buttercup. Rub dirt in it. It doesn't hurt. Be a big boy. Don't be a sissy. And how many times were you told those sorts of things? Those are called emotionally invalidating statements, the most pervasive and insidious form of emotional abuse there is. And you were fed on that, and every man and woman was fed on that because their parents are anxious around their children's emotions. They don't know how to cope with them. To soothe their own anxiety, they invalidate their children's emotions. The very worst thing you can do, because at 2 to 5 years old, the emotional centers of the brain are coming online, and parents, good parents, have to start coaching their children how to manage their own emotions. But if parents can't manage their own emotions, there is no way they can teach kids how to do that. And so everybody becomes emotionally dysfunctional. So you're told all your life while you're at home that emotions are bad. And then you're taught in school that rationality is primo and emotions are bad and you're rational. You're taught the formal system of education is based on this rationality bias, totally wrong. And so what happens when you get older? Now you're 20 now, so you've gotten through puberty and gotten out of high school. What a mess, right? Now you're in college, and think about your experiences with girls. I'm assuming you're hetero, and just think about your experiences with girls and how deep of an intimate relationship can they enter into, and how deep of an intimate relationship can you enter into? And I will say that maybe 2 inches, because everybody feels emotionally unsafe.
What do you mean 2 inches?
I mean, say you got a pool that's 10 feet deep, and you can go to the bottom of the pool and be in very deep intimacy. Most people maybe can make it 2 inches into the pool. They can put their little toe in the pool, and that's as intimate as they want to get because they don't feel emotionally safe. And the reason for that is for all of this emotional invalidation that's occurred since childhood. We haven't been taught how to become emotionally incompetent. So we don't know how to be emotionally self-aware. We don't know how to self-regulate, and we don't know how to have empathy. All skills that have to be taught. And we don't learn them in the family, and we're certainly not going to learn them at the Kelly School of Business, right?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing, like the big thing.
Skills. And the neuroscience behind it is clear. We have 2 systems on our brain, the task-focused, we have many systems, but the 2 relevant ones are task-focused and default mode. Task-focused is all about what education is about: knowledge acquisition, learning algorithms and procedures, learning critical thinking, learning logic, reasoning, statistical analysis, probability analysis, scientific method, quantitative, qualitative analysis, all that stuff. That is all task-focused training. Our default mode, which is where we sit all the time, is the social part of the brain. Learning how to listen, learning how to use empathy, learning how to calm people down, learning how to manage and reprogram childhood triggers. All of that stuff is called the social network or the default mode. And what's interesting is the task-focused system and the default mode are binary. Only one can be on at a time. When we're task-focused, we can't be social. When we're social, we can't be task-focused. And so education says, turn off that default mode, ignore it, ignore that man behind the curtain, and focus only on task focus, because the rest of it is just garbage and it will do nothing but get you in trouble. Totally wrong. There's a study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study out of San Diego, Kaiser Permanente. The study's been going on for over 10 years now. You heard about it?
Mm-hmm.
So every time a child is emotionally invalidated, that's an ACE. That's an adverse childhood experience. And what the study shows is when you're emotionally invalidated, or when you suffer that kind of emotional abuse, you're 10 to 1,000 times more likely to die of cancer, diabetes, heart disease, a million other horrible diseases later in life, because the stress of being emotionally abused in childhood carries all the way through adulthood.
Yeah. And we don't even realize, I'm sitting here in college.
We're totally ignorant of all this stuff, which is why I'm on a mission as a peacemaker to try to educate people that the way we do things is wrong. And if we want to change, if I had a magic wand, we'll never eliminate prisons completely, because there's always a small percentage of the population that's dangerous. But the prisons should not be the lock them up kind. It should be a hospital type prison, because those people their brains are really
sick. Yeah.
They've got brain dysfunction. They're never going to be able to get out of it. And so they're just unsafe. There's a very small percentage of people that are that way. Everybody else, they're in there because they were abused as children. Stop the abuse, you'll stop the crime. It's that simple.
Well, I think that's true to an even different degree. Like, what you're really talking about is emotional incompetence, right? Like,
right.
You're not trained to be emotionally competent. And there are amazing studies where, I think it was 90% of 90% of the people in prisons are antisocial. They have some form of antisocial problems.
That's a psychological assessment, but they're not understanding the root cause. And here's what we've learned in working with thousands and thousands of lifers and long-termers. Once you teach them the skills, they change and transform. And in fact, we have about, I'm going to say 2,000 inmates that have been released in California that we directly trained. Not one case of reoffending.
Wow.
No recidivism. Zero.
As opposed to 50% in the general population.
That's right.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, I mean, I was watching the testimonial videos that you have of these lifers, 25 to life, 15 to life, and they're so well spoken. Like you look at this
that way when we started with them.
Right? Like you ask the question, how this person does not look like they should be in prison, like
right.
They look
and they shouldn't be. They just got some bad they got
training
juju going on. They were born into bad families who couldn't train them properly. And so and they were inculcated into the criminal mind, and that's all they know. Look, babies are not born as murderers are not born. Murders are bred.
Yeah.
And so if we want to stop crime, then we start teaching parents to be emotionally competent and teach them how to teach their children to be emotionally competent. Parents are coaches. They have to be emotional coaches for their children, not disciplinarians. That's totally the wrong way to do it.
Well, that was one of the more interesting things that sort of came to mind as you were speaking. You're saying that, I forget the word that you're saying, but like we have this problem where we don't understand and we can't recognize our own emotions. So I feel angry. I don't know that I'm angry. Alexithymia. Right? So right. What you're describing essentially is the terrible twos, right? That's exactly what happens during the terrible twos.
That's exactly right. And
the child gets.
That's right.
Go. Yeah, go.
The cure to the terrible twos is when a little boy or a little girl is having a meltdown, which is, by the way, is the brain's way of protecting the baby.
Of course.
Meltdowns are not abnormal behaviors. It's the natural response to emotional overload. And the brain's way of dealing with that is to start crying and shouting and punching your fist through the wall in the baby, in toddler level, because the brain is protecting itself from overload. So the baby goes in a meltdown. How do you fix that? You label the toddler's emotion. Oh, baby, you're angry, you're frustrated, you're really mad. Yeah. You're really frustrated. Yeah. You're really mad. Yeah. And you're sad. Yeah. Okay. You don't feel loved. Yeah.
And he
overwhelmed.
Less overload. Yeah.
30 seconds. Did you run across the video how to calm an angry child in 30 seconds or less?
Of course.
Yeah. Okay. So there it is. Those were my niece and nephew, by the way, that many years, no, not that many years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago. They're all teenagers now. I've gotten emails from parents saying that when they have used these skills on their 2-year-olds, they end all tantrums after 4 months.
Wow.
No more tantrums ever. I did my first live workshop in 2 years in May. And we did a Zoom follow-up with everybody in the workshop. And these two guys, two managers at this company, both have 5-year-olds. And they both reported the same thing. I started affecting my 5-year-old 3 weeks ago. The behavioral change in him over the last 3 weeks is nothing short of astounding. And they both reported this. He is now calm. He is able to regulate his own emotions. He affect labels himself and he affect labels us too, which is really cute and good. And he is completely calming himself down. And all I do is affect labeling. And the other dad reported exactly the same thing. He said, yeah, it's happening with my 5-year-old too. I can't believe it. Complete massive change of behavior in 3 weeks.
Wow. So it's emotional competence. That's what it is. Right?
Being emotionally competent as a parent so that you can coach your children into emotional competency. Once you know how to be emotionally competent, it's not that difficult to teach your children the skills, but you have to have the skills yourself.
And that's one of the things.
You have to be emotionally self-aware. You have to be able to self-regulate, and you have to have empathy, cognitive and affective empathy.
Yeah, I mean, that was one of the things that you talked about that I found absolutely astounding. Is like, there's many cultures in which the parent can get angry, but the children cannot.
And this is one of them.
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell you how many people I run across that say that it was okay for mom and dad to be angry at the dinner table, but if any of us got angry or frustrated or showed any kind of emotion, off to our rooms without dinner, punished for being emotional. Why? Because the parents are emotionally incompetent and they cannot deal with their internal anxiety of seeing an emotional child. So rather than deal and coach the child through the emotion, they send the child off. That way they don't have to feel the anxiety anymore. That's how they soothe themselves. Did you ever see that that animation Inside Out?
Yeah. Incredible.
Wrong. Everything in that movie is wrong.
How?
Totally wrong. There's nothing in that movie that's correct, and it all teaches the wrong stuff. So remember the scene, and this is where the trailer scene, right? Where the little girl, I forget her name, and she's at the table, and mom asks her, well, how was school today? And she kind of looking glum and says, it's okay. Okay. And mom's trying to draw her out. And finally, dad, who's in his mind, he's watching a soccer game or something. He finally wakes up and he's now anxious because he's not been paying attention to the conversation. Wife is a little angry at him or irritated with him. And he's looking at his daughter who's being sullen. And he says, okay, you're out of here. That's disrespect. Go to your room. All that's teaching is exactly the wrong way to parent.
Oh, of course. Yeah.
The wrong way to parent.
Yeah.
And that movie did not demonstrate any of the correct ways of dealing with emotions.
Yeah. I mean, I think Inside Out was more of an internal movie of like, if you have parents that have no emotional control, how do you develop your own emotional control? Because that's the problem that children face today,
Every child faces that. And the secret is to learn how to be emotionally competent. And it's not that hard. It's so easy that I built an online course that teaches people how to be emotionally competent. And you can learn, you can get the basics, in about 4 or 5 hours. And then probably, like I said, 3 or 4 weeks of practice. And it's that fast. Our brains are hardwired for this stuff. So once we learn it, it's very easy to learn. Takes a little practice. And you have to overcome some fear and overcome some like the stuff we were talking about before. But once you get it and you practice it enough, I get it. Then everything changes. And the more you practice listening to emotions, the more emotionally competent you become. It's automatic. You can't help yourself.
Yeah, well, it's more of a shedding, right? What it feels like is it's a shedding of these repressive states in which we find ourselves.
That's a way to put it. You shed that stuff and you get down to the pure essence of what it means to be human, which is to be emotional.
And that's what you are built to do. You say we're 98% emotional.
Think of it this way, Nick. Mm-hmm. We've only had language as human beings for 230,000 years. The way that language was formed was our predecessors managed to master fire. Mm-hmm. Once they could master fire, they could light a fire, not create a forest fire, right? And use fire to cook. They could go out and they could get animal protein and render fat and eat it. That was a huge new source of calories into the human body. And what happened was there was a massive growth of the pharyngeal nerve and the pharyngeal muscles and expansion of the brain 230,000 years ago that now allowed control of the tongue, the mouth, and the larynx to be able to form many, many more sounds in a much more precise way. And that was a huge, huge shift. But before that evolutionary step, which was huge, no vocabulary, all of our predecessors' communication, of which there was a lot, was nonverbal and emotional. And so we have millions of years of evolution have adapted our brains to read the emotions of others and to be emotionally expressive ourselves, because that's how we communicated, by observation and by grunts and by body language. I mean, that's why the Mizrabian study back in the 1960s said 7% verbal, 93% nonverbal.
Yeah.
And it's true, because from an evolutionary perspective, that's the way we communicated. Then we got words, which are symbolic abstractions. That's when we began to move into the abstract world. And we're able to now pass information on into the future, which is hugely adaptive, by teaching children. And we're able to create more abstract concepts. So now we're able to start thinking about stories. Well, what's it all about, Alfie's creation stories? And, how did we get here? And this is long before science evolved.
Of course.
And so that's how it all started. But once we started verbalizing, we started paying less attention to emotions and more attention to abstract thought. And over a period of many thousands of years, thinkers started seeing that emotions were bad and rationality was good, because all they saw in emotional behavior was problems, nothing but trouble.
That's so funny.
It looked chaotic and crazy to them. And so they said, this is bad. This is the sin side of, when you get into proto-Christianity, sinful to be emotional, sinful to feel passion, sinful to have orgasm. All that's sinful because we're out of control. The only time we're in really control is when we're rational.
That's so funny. So you're saying that essentially our entire evolutionary sphere, we were emotional. And then the last 3,000 years, which is essentially like the period on the book of humanity, that last little dot.
Right.
We developed strong rational thought.
Right. Which, there's nothing wrong with rational thought. It's very powerful.
Yeah.
But it is not privileged over emotions. In fact, you cannot be rational unless you're emotional first. Think about that. How would you even know to apply critical thinking skills, for example, to a problem, unless you had an emotional reaction to the environment that told you that there was a problem out there that had to be solved?
Yeah. Yeah, right? Like you got to pick up the sensitivity.
And most people don't even get this. You can't be rational unless you're emotional first. Every decision is emotional. There is no decision in the world that we ever make that is not emotional. And all decisions are made. I mean, they are made 800 milliseconds before we're consciously aware that we made a decision. This is another thing that freaks people out. We've made decisions long before we're consciously aware, which neuroscience will tell you there's no such thing as free will because of that.
Which makes
conceptualized, which is where we're able to make conscious choices. As a general proposition, we've made our decisions long before we are aware. And our decision is based on emotion. Why? Because all of the calculations that are going on in the brain are all about which path is going to make me feel better or which path is going to make me feel less bad. That's all emotion.
Yeah. And the thing that we really don't realize is that emotions come before thought.
Always.
Right?
Always.
Yeah.
And it's layered. We start with interoception, what's going on in our body, our visceral feelings through the polyvagal system that's then communicated bidirectionally between the brain and the viscera. Then we get affective experience, which is all the neural mechanisms going on in the brain. There are 9 basic affects that we're born with. And then if we have a good childhood, we're able to take that affective experience and build emotional databases and put words to the affective experience, and we call that emotion. But if we live in an alexithemic family where parents are emotionally incompetent, at best we develop a really crude emotional database, and we're not emotionally refined at all. And that's where we're getting into problems.
So how does one change this culture? How does one do it?
Talking about this stuff, getting people to recognize that the myth of rationality is destroying us. But you just got to get more people out there. This neuroscience, the seminal study is 2007, 13, 14 years ago. It's brand new.
Yeah, and nobody knows about it. Nobody knows about it.
Nobody knows about it. Nobody understands the implications of this.
And the study is just very simply, right? And tell me if I'm wrong on this. If you label someone's affective state, if you label someone's emotion, which is a little bit of a dogma, but if you label someone's emotion, then their prefrontal cortex will activate and they will calm down because they will realize it.
As their prefrontal cortex, it's literally the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. We can be very precise here.
Mm-hmm.
Because the science is very precise. As the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex activates, the amygdala and the other limbic system regions involved in emotion
And fear. Yeah.
You're inhibited. And it happens like this. They are inversely correlated. And it's mediated through the medial prefrontal cortex, which is part of the emotional systems of the brain.
Yeah.
And so we understand the brain systems and we understand how this all works. And I defy anybody in psychology, anywhere, to show me studies that some other technique works better than this. And they can't, because there are none. That's why I wrote a long blog on active listening and nonviolent communication saying, this is all bullshit. This is just all total bullshit. It's wrong. Not only wrong, it's harmful. And it doesn't work. But why do people do it? Because they don't know any better.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things that I notice. Like when I try to calm someone down, I say, okay, tell me, right? But then, like if I just sit there and listen, then they're just gonna keep escalating themselves. You know how a thought escalates itself.
That's right, because their emotional centers are dominating their prefrontal cortex. They don't have a good emotional database because they're not emotionally competent. And so it's just so the emotions are just going to take over and it's just going to get escalated. And then for somebody like you coming in, you want to appease, or you rationalize, or you invalidate, or you try to problem solve. All these things that we do to soothe our own emotions just make the problem worse.
So there's one thing that just came to mind, and I don't know if we fully covered it. Tell me if we did, but how can someone grow some teeth, right? Someone who's struggling with agreeableness, someone who's struggling with, especially in my case, non-confrontation is sort of my emotional credo.
Here's the beauty. Learn how to listen. Because when you learn how to listen to emotions and reflect them back, you put yourself in a place where your ego is not involved.
Mm-hmm.
You're totally centered. And there's nothing anybody can say to you that's going to knock you off balance. The reason that you appease or please or try to avoid conflict is because the conflict is creating anxiety in yourself that you want to get rid of. Mm-hmm. So if you feel like if I appease people, that will make them feel better and they'll calm down and I'll feel better. Or if you try to please people, maybe if I please them, they'll calm down and I'll feel better. Or maybe if I help them solve this problem, their emotions will go away and it will make me feel better. None of that stuff works. It just makes it worse. And there's a whole reason, there's a physiological reason why that is in involving the polyvagal system, which we won't get into, but this is all based on science. When you learn how to label emotions and reflect them back, and you ignore the words, that puts you into a place of absolute equanimity. And you cannot be pushed out of that equanimity as long as you ignore the words and reflect back the emotions. And after you've done this for a couple of weeks and you've really practiced it, and you begin to see how it works, it becomes a self-affirming practice because it's so powerful. And you get so many thank yous. And people are just so grateful that you've listened to them, that now you look for opportunities to do it. And the more you do it, the better you get at it. And finally, you get so good that when somebody explodes at you, you don't need to appease them. You need to say, oh, you're having a moment. You're having an emotional moment. Let's reflect on those emotions. And so you start reflecting emotions and they calm down. And you didn't have to please. You didn't have to appease. You didn't have to problem solve. All you had to do is help them. Lend your prefrontal cortex to them for the 45 seconds it took to calm them down. That's all you have to do. And what it does is it replaces all of these old dysfunctional programs you learned because they don't work, but this one does. And your brain will immediately adapt to what works as opposed to what doesn't work. And all that anxiety you have will absolutely go away. Guaranteed, 100%.
So you just made a big connection for me. So the thing that I sort of just realized is that agreeableness is really tied to empathy, right? So when I feel as if I need to appease someone, it's because you're right. Their anxiety is
your anxiety
triggering to my anxiety because of my empathy. And I never put those connections
together.
That's right.
So you have an empathic sensitivity. You feel their anxiety that makes you anxious, and now you're going to unconsciously do whatever you can to soothe your own anxiety.
Yes.
And it becomes very selfish.
So that...
And
that not only,
as you try to soothe your own anxiety, you just make them even more angry or more upset.
yes, and it triggers a
You,
short term. Exactly. It triggers a nice little short term solution, right? I'm going to do whatever I can in this moment. And this is what parents do, as you're saying, to
soothe my anxiety.
To soothe my anxiety.
That's right. Every human being does it until they're trained to do otherwise. And it's the worst. Soothing your own anxiety is the worst thing you can do in the face of somebody else's strong emotions, especially children. But we don't know any better.
Yeah.
and it's all unconscious because we are not emotionally confident. We are not emotionally self-aware.
So here's the thing. It seems like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that we're still, even though, like even if I use your strategy, I'm still using a short-term strategy, right? I'm still making someone stop in 90 seconds, but it also considers the long-term potentialities of it. It also makes someone feel validated. It's also emotionally competent.
And it makes you emotionally confident. The more you do this, the more emotionally confident you become. Automatically. It's reprogramming. Every time you label somebody's emotions, you are reprogramming your own brain in a very positive, powerful way.
So tell me, how is it that I could, one of the things is it's reflexive, right? Again, like we were just talking about it, emotions come before thought. My appeasing actions are probably going to come before I sit there and I say, okay, let's use Doug's strategy. Doug's strategy is better. It's going to work. So tell me, how is it that, and I'm not sure if I see this connection yet, how is it that this strategy is able to heal my own anxiety and my own feeling for the sense of appeasement?
Because the more you are able to label somebody else's emotions, you're building your own emotional database at the same time. You're growing your own emotional awareness. And as you grow your own emotional self-awareness, you will become more and more aware of of the nuances of your own emotional experience.
Well, we could say that already, right? Just from this conversation, I just figured out that my appeasement is triggered by anxiety.
That's right.
Right.
Now you know that when you try to appease as a pleaser, you're soothing your own anxiety. That's what's going on. So now your next step is to say, all right, what are the conditions that make me anxious? Well, when other people are upset or angry or conflict situations, I'm always going to feel anxious. Then the next step is to say, okay, so what other strategies can I use other than appeasement when somebody's in conflict or angry or upset? Well, the first thing I want to go to is affect labeling. I'm going to affect label myself. I'm going to say, me, Nick, oh man, they're really upset and I'm feeling really anxious right now.
Because they're upset.
Anxious and afraid and fearful. And I feel a little bit of shame and embarrassment because I don't know what to do. And I feel like I'm a little bit out of control and I feel uncertain and confused. And that's making me feel anxious. Then you affect label the other person.
And the affect label. Well, you just discovered, right? Or you just psychoanalyzed a yes man, right? Because that's what a yes man does. A yes man, because I noticed I'm sitting here, I'm like, okay, what were the recent conversations that I have? In a recent conversation, my friend was telling me about the problems in her life and blah, blah, blah. And I had opinions and I didn't say them. And it was probably because I didn't want to cause problems. And that turned me into a yes man. That turned me into oh yeah, okay, you're right. Yep, I agree. Definitely.
That's the first layer of listening, where you're paying attention and you're using basically nonverbal responses. Yeah, nodding your head, paying attention. That's called following, which is good. And the other good thing you did is you didn't jump in with your own opinions and problem solving. She didn't want to hear that.
No way.
Now, the next step for you is when your friend has a story like that again, listen to her emotions. Oh man, you were really upset. That really frustrated you. You felt really unsupported and unappreciated. That kind of pissed you off. And just make it colloquial, make it very casual, and just throw in emotion. Don't say anything else other than emotions. And watch what happens. And she'll say, yeah, that's exactly right. Well, tell me more. So she goes on and you invite her to tell more. And then you label that. Now be careful. I tell in my graduate classes at Pepperdine, I teach this, and it's so funny. I'll teach this like on a Friday, and I'll tell my female students, I'll say, ladies, and they're all law students, or they're masters of dispute resolution, they're graduate students, or LLMs, and masters in laws. And I'll say, look, I know, yeah, you're going to go out tonight, Friday night. This is pre-pandemic, of course. You're going to go out tonight. You're going to hit the bars, probably get blasted. All cool. I'm fine with you coming in to class tomorrow morning hungover. I expect it. And they're all laughing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, be very careful about using affect labeling, because if you affect label a guy in the bar, you better have a 10-foot crowbar with you, because you're going to have to pry him off, because this creates instant intimacy. And so be very careful. And they say, oh, yeah, right, Professor Noll. Next morning, sure enough, they come in, they're hungover. And I said, all right, what happened? And invariably, 2 or 3 of the women, and at Pepperdine, it's on Malibu, so they're all generally pretty good looking. And they'll start telling stories about how they affect labeled some strange guy, and they just could not get rid of him.
Oh,
and they said, I didn't believe it, but I'm a believer now.
Well, it's like those studies on attraction theory, how they sit there and like a little child and a little baby boy and his mother, and how the baby boy feels when the mother gives nurturing.
Yeah, it's Bowlby's work, all on attachment, which is really powerful and it's important. So, I mean, if you want to test this out, next time you're around a girl, just listen to her emotions, reflect her emotions, and just stop and be the observer. She's a lab rat right now, right? Not a girl, lab rat. And you're just gonna listen to her, and reflect her emotion, and you're gonna observe what her behaviors are and what happens. You will be shocked at how powerful this is.
We'll see. I must try it.
Yeah. So here's what I want you to do before you start trying this out on unsuspecting girlfriends of yours.
Okay.
Practice for a week or two. So you're home in New Jersey now, or are you back in Indiana?
I'm in Indiana University, 40,000 students here.
So do you go out in the morning and get coffee?
No, I do not.
Okay. Do you go, are you eating at the student union, or, where are you getting your...
Yeah, I see people very often, yeah.
Okay, so what I want you to do is when you're in the student union, you're getting food, maybe you're getting breakfast or lunch or getting coffee or whatever, they're going to be people behind the counters and stuff that are preparing the food and putting it out. You affect label every single, not the students, but all the servers and all the people, the service people. Look at them, and one emotion, you're really happy. You look a little tired. You're a little frustrated. Mostly it's going to be happy. You look really happy today. You look kind of excited. Go to the cash register. There'll be somebody there sitting on a stool taking the credit cards of the card, whatever it is. One affect label to them. Oh man, you look really happy today. Oh, I am. And just observe. One label, usually positive, happy or excited. You could do tired or frustrated, but keep it to those 4. Label them conversationally, and then watch what happens. Just observe. Okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to do it naturally, and I'm going to observe what happens.
Okay, and I'm saying
every day. Do it every day. Every time you go into the student union, or you go to a restaurant, or you go to Starbucks, wherever you go, do it to strangers, and do it until you've gotten enough data, observational data, to say, "Wow, this really works." And then you can start trying your girlfriends, your friends, or your guys that are friends of yours. And when you start with friends, again, keep it very off the cuff, very conversational. Don't go into a deep affect label. Don't go through the 6 layers. Just one-offs. And again, observation. Okay, I'm going to try affect labeling her. I'm going to listen to her emotions and reflect back 1 or 2 emotions, and then see what happens. And so make it an experiment.
Okay.
It's going to be a continuing experiment for the next week to 10 days, and do it every single day, every opportunity you get. And by the end of 10 days, you should have this nailed pretty well. It should become habitual within 10 days.
So it should be like a conversation starter. Like I go up to you and I say, you look happy.
Yeah, you're walking up and you're getting your burger, right? And some guy in the back has been flipping burgers. And so we give you your burgers. Hey, man, you look pretty happy today. And you'll go, whoa, yeah, I am. Thanks for listening. Thanks for validating me. He won't say that. That's the reaction you get.
Okay. I think that's a good place to end it. I think that's a good social experiment. I'm going to try it.
Okay.
All right, Doug. Thank you so much. This was a crazy podcast. I actually came into this podcast knowing that I was going to learn something emotionally. Like I just felt that it was going to happen. So thank you for coming on. Thank you for teaching me stuff.
Okay, so I want to tell people where they can go.
Yep.
I'm going to create, I haven't created the page yet, but I will create it later today. You're going to record this and put it out.
Yep. It'll be out sometime within the next week.
Okay, so let me make a note. The website is going to be, so if people want to go and learn about everything that I talked about, they're going to go to Doug Noll, DOUGNOLL.co/Nick Lugo.
Lugo. Lugo.
Nick Lugo. So everybody in the audience, if you want to learn more about this, if you go to dougnoll.co/Nick Lugo, there are going to be 4 things on that page for you. Number 1, free ebook that describes everything that I've talked about. Give me your email address. Of course, you end up on my email list, but you can always unsubscribe if you don't like it. Get on my list, get the free ebook. Number 2, you can buy my book, De-Escalate, How to Calm an Angry Person in 90 Seconds or Less. Number 3, you can buy the De-Escalate video course. So I've been talking about how to calm an angry person. Buy that course, $198. And then if you really want to invest in yourself, you can buy the basic and advanced emotional competence course. That's a little more expensive. It's normally $14.99, but I'll give all the listeners, I'll put a 50% discount code in there.
Wow.
And so if you want, if just for your audience only, click on it. It's the sales page. Click on it, put in the discount code, and instead of $14.99, it'll be whatever that, call it $650 or something like that, roughly $649. Get the whole course for emotional competency, 50% discount code. So that's my gift to you and to your audience, because I want people to go out and learn this stuff.
Wow. I really appreciate it. You have a very messianic message, and I love it. I love it. I think people need to learn this, and I'm going to share this with my friends. That's definitely going to happen.
Very cool. All right, Nick, thanks a lot. It's been great.